Today I want to address what I call Linux fanboys. Now, fanboys is not something specific to Linux. They exist in many different realms. You get programming language fanboys, you get operating system fanboys, you get vehicle manufacturer fanboys. You get the Audi fanboys and the BMW fanboys and the Ferrari fanboys, and everything else is no good. Now, it does concern me that a lot of Linux desktop users are fanboys as well. And that sort of, in my opinion, goes against what the whole Linux world stands for. Open source communities, what we stand for, and that is for choice. And the moment somebody, now I'm pretty sure most of you know which specific Linux community or communities I'm referring to when I talk here. But the moment you say something like, well, a lot of users from Ubuntu ultimately move over to this particular distribution. Well, that might be true, but that doesn't mean much, okay? If you're, for instance, dealing with servers, you'll find there aren't many different servers that you jump around. You might start with Ubuntu and end up on Red Hat, but the chances are you probably won't. With servers, you install it and you leave it forever. It just lives. So you start up with Ubuntu, or you start with Debian, or you start with, maybe you even got CentOS on your as a server, and it's still running. And it's going to run for a long time. Only if there's a real reason you'll move over to something else. So what a lot of guys say is, for instance, to Windows users, if they're going to come over to Linux, the desktop environment that they should use is, for instance, Linux Mint with a Cinnamon desktop environment. I don't see why is that good for Windows users. Let's just for a moment take out the desktop environment, Cinnamon. Let's put that aside and just look at Linux Mint itself. Now, you do get the Debian edition. I'm not referring to that one. I'm referring to the standard Ubuntu-based one. So it is really a very capable operating system. So you can say, well, the fact that it might be a little bit heavy in the sense of that there's a lot of your multimedia plugins that come with it by default, your NVIDIA drivers, your proprietary drivers you can run. You're not forced to use the open source drivers. Now, for a lot of users that are using computers in the real world, okay, that are not enthusiasts that like fiddling, but actually use their computers to do work on and to watch movies and to just use their computer and it works and they're happy and everything is good. That doesn't mean they do nothing else. I mean, I'm a software developer. I code many hours a day, every single day. And I'm a full-time Linux desktop user and I have multiple servers. Now, for me, having an operating system that is stable and that just works and that I can do, after I've done my work, I can relax and do something else. I can run, I can use Blender. I can do all these things. I have a reasonably latest versions of Blender and GIMP and so forth. Well, I use Linux Mint and I love it. The actual desktop environment I use is not Cinnamon. It's XFCE. And but even though I prefer XFCE, I did start, when I started using Linux Mint, I started with Cinnamon. And I don't see how Linux Mint Cinnamon is good for Windows users, other than the fact that there's a menu that you can click on in the bottom left-hand corner on the panel, or on the taskbar, let's call it. Or you can press the meta key, the Windows key, and it opens up, the menu opens up. But what is actually inside the menu is very Linuxy, in the sense that the applications are split up into categories and so forth. That's very much a Linux idea that's been around for many, many, many years. So how that menu is good for Windows users, other than the fact that there's a menu, I don't know, because many desktop environments have menus. They might not all be in the bottom left-hand corner. They might just be a right mouse click on the desktop and you get your menu. How a menu is good for Windows users, or let's say I understand that it's good for Windows users because they might be used to menus, but they're very soon going to realize that they can do everything with shortcut keys. Like I very seldom actually use a menu. I've actually removed my menu, like in XFC, I have no menu. If I want the menu, I Alt F3 and I got my menu there. But even in Cinnamon, I just Windows key and start typing what I want, and it's instantaneous. I don't navigate in a menu, and a lot of people don't navigate in menus, even though they might have a menu. So I don't know. I just find, looking down at people because, or not necessarily looking down, but saying things like, well, that's a noob distribution. Linux Mint is nowhere near a noob distribution. It is a stable distribution, and a lot of guys that want to fiddle, when they run into some stability issue or a version of a package that, because it's a rolling release, something was not properly tested and it's been deployed, and the guys start using it on their favorite rolling release distribution, and there's a little bug, well, that guy that's probably sitting on that rolling release is probably technically quite capable, and he can fiddle, or she can fiddle, and sort out what the bug is, and things go on. I mean, I've come to a same situation many times where, I've helped people install some Linux distribution on their computer, and I must admit it is normally Linux Mint Cinnamon, and then they run into some kind of problem at some point, and they tell me they've got this problem. And I said, how on earth did they get to that being a problem? I've never seen this problem, I've never found this to be a problem. So how did they get themselves into the situation? Then I realized, well, it's just because as little things pop up, to me, it's nothing just to fix them. Boom, 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 it's done. I don't even realize sometimes that I'm doing certain things. But for somebody that is not a fiddler, they might not know how to do these things. So they want a stable system. Now, I recently did a review of Elementary, and I think that is brilliant to give to somebody that doesn't want to fiddle at all, your granny, your granddad that just wants to browse and do email. But I did find a little issue in it, which if somebody is going to use Elementary and they come across this, they're going to be totally confused. And that was just to install packages. If you double click on a dev package, it didn't open it up with a package manager to install it. You have to do it from the command line. Now, that might be a little bit confusing. So there are many things in Linux distributions that favor different kinds of people. And trying to put people into a pigeonhole and say, you should use this or you should use that. You must remember, we all have choices. And that is what made the Linux community great in the first place. I think one thing that us Linux guys must remember, compared to some other like Mac OS and Windows guys, for instance, is that we have to always add a little disclaimer to our statements, which they don't have to. Okay, because that little disclaimer that they have to add has actually been taken away from them. They don't have a choice in their decision. We can say, I think that Manjaro is the best distribution because, all right, you always have to add a little because behind it. Or say, I think it's the best distribution for this kind of user. Now, Windows guys don't have to say that because they don't have any choices. They can't say, well, I think you should still be using Windows NT 2000 because of this little thing. Don't use Windows 10. No. Use Windows XP with Service Pack 2, not Service Pack 3. Windows guys don't have those choices, but us as Linux guys do have those choices. So when the Windows guys are talking to us and we make statements which they relate to, in the sense of when we say, well, Ubuntu using the GNOME 3 desktop is the best choice. That was maybe a little bit harsh. Not is the best choice, but I think that Ubuntu with GNOME 3 is absolutely amazing. It's great. Then they don't really know about all the other options that they have. And then they're going to take away from it is, well, we should be using Ubuntu with GNOME 3. They try it, they don't like GNOME 3, and then they go back to Windows. Because they don't really know about their choices. So if you make them understand that they have choices, then far more people might come over. And making statements like, you only have street cred when you use a tiling window manager. No, tiling window managers for a lot of workflows are extremely limiting and should not be used. But if that is for you in your particular workflow, and it works for you, then that is very good. Then you use it. Then you can say things like, I think tiling window managers are absolutely great, in specific this particular tiling window manager, and my reasons are the following. Now, again, like I say, that little disclaimer. So you got to tell somebody that what your reasons are, because they might not know those things. Like a Windows user doesn't know about tiling window managers. He doesn't get that concept, the idea. It's brand new to him. So just telling them that, you don't have street cred, and then they feel they've got to come over into the Linux world, and everyone's going to look down on them if they don't use tiling window managers, because they actually don't know that that's a choice they have. They don't have to do it. So guys, I think we should just be a little bit more open to everyone else. And yes, I understand that we do have our favorites. I have my favorites as well that I like bringing up. But we must always remember that, especially with new users, new people coming over, we should let them understand that they have choices and help them in what they want to do and what a good solution for them would be. But bearing in mind that it's, a lot of guys that come over from Windows, they might be very technical guys. There might be some administrator, or maybe he's a developer, and they're coming over into the Linux world. So they are techies themselves. They just, they haven't tasted the Kool-Aid yet. They just put their toes into the water. They don't really know much about Linux, but they are fiddlers. So telling them, oh, okay, well, you should start with something fairly simple like elementary, it's going to do them no good, because in 3 months' time, they have progressed so far that elementary or whatever distro, or let's say they're using some distro that's got the default of GNOME 3, and they find that this is not a very nice desktop environment, and they want to use something else, and now they're kind of stuck because they did install. Their main computer is now stuck with GNOME 3. The environments have been set up, all the programming stuff has been installed and so forth, and it's just too much effort. They say, and then they move on to maybe they go back to Windows or whatever. So when you give advice, it's like selling somebody a computer. You don't just ask them, like, what do you use a computer for? And they say gaming. And you say, okay, well, you need the following. And you sell them this amazing, 77 million core, 7 terabyte, 16 SLI NVIDIA card system, when they don't need any of that. So with your distributions that you can say to Windows users, or not just Windows users, but anyone that's new, I agree. Actually, who was it? I actually saw some video a while ago. It was either Gardner or Lunduk. I can't remember. I think it was Gardner that was saying that, well, actually many guys are saying it. Altair was saying it as well. But we should choose a few distros that we recommend to new users. Now, we shouldn't give a distro to a new user, like, for instance, elementary, unless that is something they want. I think a very good starting position for a new user is something like Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop, not because it's Windows-like, because it's easy to use, and if they do want to start fiddling, it's got many configuration options which they can change. And Linux Mint being a very stable system, so we should push that, not because we think it's easy for new users, but because it's super stable and it allows them to fiddle when they want to fiddle. And they're not going to, as they get good, let's say in a year's time, then they might want to reinstall their system with something else or whatever, but a lot of them are not going to. So maybe some guys, they do want to do some fiddling, they like the Linux Kool-Aid, but they got work to do. So they're not going to, they don't want to reinstall constantly because they want to do distro hopping. So give them something good that works. Linux Mint works, Give them Cinnamon. If they're not happy with Cinnamon, well, just install Mate or install XFCE or whatever the case may be. And then maybe in 2 years' time they're ready, not because their system is slowed down to a standstill like in Windows and they have to reinstall their operating system, but maybe they want to do distro hopping just for fun. And well, by then, in a year's time, they might be, they might have been able to make a good choice. But where do they start? Let's not put them down and say, oh, well, since you're a newbie, you should be using this, or you should be using that, or oh, don't try this because you're a newbie. Everyone, even noobs, even newbies, got to start somewhere. We all started somewhere. All us Linux guys started somewhere. And telling people, especially people that are new to the communities, telling them that if they're not in this community, they're not in that community, they're not a cool kid. They have no street cred. I think that's breaking them down, and we're going to lose a lot of people. We should rather stand behind a few distributions and push those, and not make people feel because you're a noob, you have to use these distributions. Rather, okay, noobs can use those distributions or whatever, but we as a Linux community are choosing the following distributions, 1 or 2 or 3, and I say, for instance, a good one to start with is Linux Mint, because it's stable and they can do fiddling. And go ahead, guys, start with that, use that. You can sit with that until you really know what's happening with going on with Linux. You're not really going to mess up your system, because most of the stuff that you need is installed already. You don't have to do it yourself, and things are just going to work. And then maybe as a rolling release, Manjaro can be a good one to push. Well, there's 2 that I'm suggesting. So for a rolling release, we can say Manjaro and tell them what is good about Manjaro and give them their options of a desktop environment. Remember, Cinnamon is not only a Mint desktop environment. I've run Cinnamon on Anarchy Linux, which is an Arch-based Linux, without any issues whatsoever. So like I say, we can push Linux Mint, stability, and choose a desktop environment, and Manjaro, also stable, and choose a desktop environment. That's my 2 cents, guys. So I hope you Linux guys don't think, I know a lot of you will be agreeing with what I'm saying, and pushing just a few specific distributions, especially for the newer people. But that doesn't mean that this is what they have to stick to forever. But they are good enough to stick to those distributions for many years if they so want to. So yeah, there we go. That's my 2 cents.